So what I'm going to show you how to do this time is I'm going to show you how to make this image. The original image is actually nothing more than a photo of a rose, albeit a really good photo, but essentially you'll notice that we have several layers over here on the side, including a layer group. I'm going to go ahead and hide each one of them so you can kind of see how it all builds together to create the final image. So here we have a layer group with two layers in it, one layer being a puddle and the other layer being some of the shading for the puddle, and then after that you have some of the puddle or the color dripping, and then some shading at the base, and then a layer that desaturates the top half of the flower, then two more layers that collectively make the top of the flower lighter to make it look like a white rose instead of a dark gray rose, and then one last layer on top to add some shading onto the actual drizzle of color. So in this lesson I'm going to show you how I did all of that. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a puddle underneath of this rose to kind of give the look that the color is kind of just dropping down, you know, on the bottom of the rose. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create that shape first, and to create that shape we're going to use the paths tool. So the first thing I want to do is I want to right click on my layer and click new layer, and I'm going to set the layer to transparency and just click OK. So now I have two layers, and I'm going to put the puddle on this second layer here. If you don't know much about layers, there is going to be a link above this video on my webpage that will teach you all about layers and help you understand what they're doing. So just for organization's sake, I'm going to name this puddle color and click OK. Now I'm going to click on my paths tool and I'm going to draw the shape of my puddle. And I'm going to start right here, and I'm just going to start dragging out that shape. Now here's the thing, we need to actually trace the outer edge of our rose because we don't want the puddle to show up above the rose. So just take your time and slowly trace the outside of the rose. And what I'm doing here, whenever I've got a sharp corner, I'm holding in shift, I'm going to move my mouse, and I'm going to release shift, and it'll break that corner for me. And I'll just keep on tracing right along the rose until I have it completely traced out. And that didn't turn out very well, so I'm going to undo that by hitting Control Z and just continue right on. So for the sake of saving you time of having to sit here and watch me trace this entire path, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video and resume it whenever I'm done tracing. Alright, so as you can see, I have traced the outer line of my rose, and I have my puddle pretty well made and ready to go. Now I do want to note that after you create your path, if you don't like something, if you don't like the shape somewhere, you can always go back to the paths tool and edit it by clicking and dragging nodes and, you know, moving things around to kind of change how it's shaped. So feel free to go back and really fine-tune your path until you're really happy with it. Like right here, I'll notice that I kind of missed a spot, so, you know, I can just drag the path around and fix it. But actually, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to leave that alone, and I'll probably fix that later with a brush tool. Alright, so also I have my path. I'm in the paths dockable dialog up here, and I have shown my path to make it visible, just to make it a little bit easier for me to kind of see what it's going to be doing. Now, if you hold in shift and press the V key on your keyboard, it will actually turn your path into a selection so that you can work with it from there. Alternatively, you can also right click on the path and click path to selection, but Shift V is a nice little shortcut. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to right click on our puddle color layer that we made earlier and click Add Layer Mask. And we're going to set the layer mask to Selection and press Add. So what happened now is we now have a layer mask that is equal to the path that we made here. Now if you don't know anything about layer masks, there's a video above that will teach you how to use layer masks and what they do. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. It will definitely help make this lesson a lot easier for you to understand. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this puddle color layer with a red color. Now here's the interesting thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the color red that I use matches the color red of the actual rose itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click in the bottom left corner where my color palette, foreground and background colors are, and I'm going to click on the eyedropper right here, and it'll let me pick a color to use for my puddle. And I want to try to pick a semi-mid-toned color, somewhere, an average of the color, and then just click OK. And then I'm just going to click on the bucket tool, and I'm going to fill this entire layer with that color red. And thanks to the layer mask, the only part that is actually affected is the area inside of my path. So I'm going to go ahead and hide my path now because I no longer need that, and we're going to work from there. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the top half of the rose and make it black and white so that it has that white look to start making it look like half of the rose's color is melting away. To do that, we are going to first right click on our layers dockable dialog and click new layer, and let's name this layer rose color, and then click white for the layer fill type and click OK. So now we have a rose color layer, and if we set this layer mode to color, you'll notice that the image turns black and white. We're going to go ahead and use that to our advantage and create the black and white, make a portion of the rose black and white by using the layer mask to mask off what portion of the rose is not in color, and then let the rest of it stay in color. Now, again, if you don't know anything about layer modes, I have a lesson specifically on layer modes, and it's in the video. It's going to be in above this video in a link. So I highly recommend that you check that out before you go any further if you haven't already. So let's go ahead and click on our paths tool, and we're going to start drawing the general shape of our boundary between the color portion of the rose and the non-color portion. So just start on the left side and just start trying to closely match the contour of the rose, and just kind of trace away. And you'll notice on the edges I'm kind of dropping down a little bit and dropping up, and that's because it helps keeps it from looking like it's just a single edge all the way across. You want to kind of try to create some variance between each petal, otherwise it'll kind of make your edge look sort of flat. And then just keep tracing, and whenever you're done, we will cap it off at the top. Now this time, since the entire top area is white, we're going to just go ahead and kind of click around the flower like the rose like this. And then right here, where it's a little tricky, I'm going to trace it a little bit closer, just because it'll make things easier later, because we're going to actually use a different method to isolate the background of the top half of the rose. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and press Shift V again to turn our path into a selection. Right click on our layer mask, or our layer, and click Add Layer Mask, and again set it to selection and click Add. Now what's going to happen is all of the color on your rose is going to restore. So we're going to now click Select None, and then hide that, well actually click on another tool to get rid of that path. So next up, we're going to go ahead and duplicate this layer twice so that it lightens up the rose. Okay, I didn't like my initial path, so I went ahead and did another path using the same general process, and I got a result that I liked a little bit better. So now that we have our path ready to go, we're going to right click on our rose color layer and we're going to click duplicate layer, and then right click on it and click edit layer attributes and name this rose white 1. And just change the layer mode to overlay. Now what you're going to notice is two things happen here. First off, the rose got lighter, which is what we wanted. But the problem is, if you look up here toward the top, you'll see that that path that we created had created an edge along the top of this rose, which means that we actually have to go through and create a perfect edge all the way along this rose to prevent that from happening. Now, you could use the paths tool and go through and trace this whole thing, but since this rose is a very deep red color on a very light background, it's going to be a lot easier to use a pretty neat method that I teach in my layer mask book, where we isolate the background using color. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually right click on our rose and we're going to click duplicate layer, and we're going to go ahead and move it to the top so it's all we see. And from there, we're going to change the color of the rose to blue, because the color blue is much darker whenever things are black and white. Essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a black and white, make the rose completely black and the background completely white, and then we're going to take that and we're going to turn it into a layer mask, and we're going to take the top half of that layer mask, this rose area, and we're going to apply it to our existing layer mask on our rose color and our rose white layers. So if that doesn't make a lot of sense to you, there's a link above from my layer mask book. I highly recommend that you buy it and look through it. It's a very short book. I think it's like 60 pages long, but it's loaded with information and it'll really help you with all of this kind of stuff. So click colors, hue saturation, and we're going to change the color hue of the flower to blue. And then click OK. And now click colors, desaturate, and set it to luminosity, and click OK. And then from there, we will just click colors, levels, and we'll adjust the levels until our rose is completely black and our background is completely white. Then click OK. We're not really worried about this bottom half. We're only really worried about the top half where the rose actually, where the part of the rose that we're actually going to use exists. And then you'll notice that there's a couple of white areas inside of the rose still that we want to get rid of. So we'll go ahead and hit the D key on our keyboard, or click on the foreground and background color, and just color with the color black on some of those artifacts toward the top. And then, okay, so now we have our perfect layer mask set up and ready to go. So just click on the free select tool and start where that path changes on the leaf, and just kind of select this general area. Press enter to commit that, and then hit Control C for copy. Hide your rose layer, and then click on the rose white layer mask and hit Control V for paste. Right click on this and click anchor layer, and whoops, I did that backwards. Turn your rose layer back on. The problem is the rose is black and the background is white, and if you look closely at our layer mask, it's actually the other way around on the layer mask. So to fix that, we're going to go ahead and click select none to deselect all, and then we're going to actually invert the colors to make the rose white and the background black. So click colors, invert, and then click select. Oh, guess we can't do that. And then just redo that selection again. Enter to commit. Control C for copy. Hide the rose layer. Click on the rose white 1 layer mask. Paste, which is Control V. Right click on the floating selection that's created and click anchor layer. And then repeat that process again, but this time on the rose color layer. I don't know why it's doing that. So go ahead and create your selection again. Control C, click on the rose color layer, paste, right click, and click anchor layer. And we can delete this rose layer on top. So now if you right click on our layer mask and you click show layer mask, you'll notice that the edge of the rose is perfectly selected. But there's a little bit of a problem. Whenever I created my lasso selection earlier on the rose white layer, as well as the rose color layer, I kind of cut off a little bit of stuff up here. You'll notice the top half of this is a little light, and then this is kind of not right. So to fix that, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm selecting the right path and hit Shift V to turn that path into a selection again. And then I'm going to click select invert so that I have everything but the inside of that path selected. And I'm just going to go ahead and click on my brush tool, and I'm going to fix that issue by brushing black on that edge of that selection. And then I got to rough this in a little bit. Yeah. And then do the same thing with the rose white layer. Brush all that away. And just whenever you do this, just be careful to not get too far down, and you won't have to worry about fixing it like I'm having to do right now. But you see that selection prevents me from overstepping my boundaries of the original edge that I created, so it makes it really easy to just edit it. Okay, so now click select none and hide that path because we don't need it anymore. And now we have a completed black and white top half of the rose and a slightly lighter. But honestly, I think the rose needs to be even lighter than that. So I'm going to right click on my rose white layer and click duplicate layer, and then change that one to rose white 2 and click OK. So now we have a white top half of the rose and a red bottom half. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to actually click on the smudge tool, and we're going to start kind of smudging in some of this edge to make it look not so hard. We're going to kind of give it, you know, this look that everything's really droopy and dripping and coming down at different rates, because, you know, whenever things drip, they don't all come down at the same time like what you see here. So to do that, we're going to first hide the rose white 1 and rose white 2. Honestly, I just put those in there so you can see the purpose of them. We're actually going to replace their layer masks here in a little bit with the rose color layer mask, just because we're going to be doing all of our work on that rose color layer mask first. So go ahead and click on the smudge tool. This is a fun tool that I've never really worked with in any of my other lessons, so get ready. The shortcut key for the smudge tool is S, and it'll bring it out ready to go. So what we're going to do first is we're going to kind of use a little bit of a bigger smudge, and we're just going to start pulling detail down, trying to match the contour of the rose, and just start smudging some of those details. And I actually have a shortcut key assigned to my mouse so that scrolling in and out makes the brush bigger and smaller, and it makes things a lot easier, especially whenever you're doing things like this. To change that, you just click Edit, Preferences, and then in the input controllers you can go to your mouse wheel, and you can set what it does whenever it goes up and down inside of that window. If you don't want to set that, you can also just use the brackets on your keyboard, but it seems to be a lot faster to just use the mouse wheel. And then just smudge constantly. I mean, just really work it in, and you're probably going to come back on this 3 or 4 different times throughout the lesson, or throughout your image, because you're always going to see something that you're like, I don't like that very much. Like this is too much. So we're going to click on the smudge tool and smudge some of that red back in, and just keep on breaking it up all the way through, and just take your time and keep massaging it in until you're happy with it. So for your sake, I'm going to again stop the lesson and resume it after I get a result I'm happy with. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that result there. So I'm going to go ahead and take that, and I'm going to actually duplicate the layer mask onto my rose white 1 and rose white 2 layers. Truthfully, I could right click on this and click mask to selection and go through each one of these and actually turn them into this selection, but it's probably going to be easy to just delete these layers, rose white 1 and rose white 2, and then just duplicate our rose color layer twice, and then just rename the layers rose white 1 and rose white 2, and then just change their layer modes to overlay. Alright, so now we have this really cool looking droopy feel on the rose itself. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually start creating some of the shapes of the actual color flowing down on the puddle itself. And to do that, we are going to start by first creating a new layer. So we're going to right click here and we're going to click new layer, and we're going to call this layer color flow, I guess. Or maybe drain. Yeah. And then set the layer fill type to transparency and click OK. And we're going to also fill this layer with the same color as our puddle with the bucket tool. And then we're going to right click on it and we're going to click add layer mask, and we're going to set this layer mask to black full transparency and click add. So now we have a fully red colored layer with a color drain, or with a layer mask on it that's black, thus making it entirely invisible. So if we hit the D key on our keyboard and then click P for paintbrush, or click on the paintbrush tool over here, we can now brush in the color white. So switch here over to your white, and you can start brushing in shapes. Now you'll notice whenever you are brushing that the color kind of disappears into the puddle. So it really makes it hard to be able to blend all this stuff together because it just kind of disappears in there. To fix that, we're going to actually make our puddle better match the shading of the rest of the image instead of just looking like a red blob in the bottom of the rose. So to do that, we're going to click on the puddle color layer that we created earlier, and we're going to set its layer mode to multiply. And you'll notice that really helps a lot because it keeps the shading from the underside of the rose and a couple other things. But you will notice that now we can really tell on this little area that I failed to properly trace earlier, it's not right. So to fix that, we're going to go ahead and just kind of rough the edge in by coloring the color black around our edge. So we're just going to kind of rough this in with the paintbrush tool using a semi-soft brush. Just brush that detail away. There we go. Alright, so now that we've done that, our puddle looks a lot better. So we're going to go ahead and click on our color drain layer and reuse the hard brush that we mentioned using earlier. And we're going to color white on this layer and just kind of start brushing in a couple of generic shapes to kind of give us that look that we want. Brush one here, maybe one here, And let's do one here. Okay, so now we have a couple of our larger shapes and kind of the general area on where they're going to go. So we're going to now smudge all of this detail so it kind of blends together a little bit. So go ahead and just click on your smudge tool and make it a little bit smaller and just start pulling the base. And the top. Just kind of smudge that a little bit so it's not so hard. And just continue this, and actually it's a little bit easier to do this with a tablet. So if you have a tablet, just go ahead and click on the smudge tool and just kind of stroke all those in. You know, pull back to pull some of the color away. You can always use the mouse or your brackets, I mean, to kind of make it a little bit smaller and just rub out those details in the bottom. Just kind of make it look like it's spreading out whenever it gets to the base. And think about the shape of the rose. Think about how it would probably flow in all likelihood. And the trick is a lot of times a smaller smudge with a stronger push sometimes helps a little bit. So if you turn your rate up some, you'll notice that it'll push a lot harder. That's kind of helpful whenever you're trying to really get those sharp details. And just keep on smudging until you're happy with your result. So again, save you guys the time and the trouble, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video until I'm happy with my result. But just keep smudging and pushing away, pushing and pulling until you get what you like. So as you'll notice, I went ahead and clicked on my paintbrush tool and I added a couple more strokes throughout this to kind of create these smaller trickles. And I just simply, to do that, I just clicked on my paintbrush tool and I started from a higher source and I just used a smaller hard brush and just kind of went through and started creating some of these general shapes. And then again, just like I did with the bigger shapes, I just took the smudge tool and I just smudged the crap out of them, really. Smudged it until I created the shape I was happy with. You know, you can, and then if you don't like something that you did, like right there, I'm not very happy with that, I just undo until I get back to where I was, and you're good to go. So now that I have the general shapes kind of sorted out here, we're going to go ahead and start working on some of the highlights for this color. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click and I'm going to click, well actually I already have it done here, so I'll show you what the result is first. And you'll see how it kind of creates some lightness and a lot of extra color. It kind of creates some dynamic to it. So we're going to go ahead and create that. To do that, we're going to right click and we're going to click new layer, and we're going to set this layer to color highlight. And we'll just fill this layer with the same color, just a little bit lighter, and click on the bucket tool, fill it with that color. Right click on it, add a layer mask, set the layer mask to black, and click add. And then we're just essentially going to take our paintbrush tool and start by brushing white on our layer mask in the areas where we want to see some of that highlighting. Its size a little smaller. And note the light source is on the right side coming down like this, so we're going to try to focus a little bit more on putting the light toward that side to help kind of give it that look that we want. Yeah, and I'm using my Wacom tablet and I'm just kind of stroking a little bit lighter in some areas, a little bit harder in some areas to kind of help create that precursor for some of that shading that we're about to do. And then now just take your smudge tool and make it a little bigger and start by smudging some of the larger details in place. And then make the size smaller and start working some of the work it out a little bit more detail. And just like before, just take your time and smudge it a whole bunch. And eventually, actually maybe now, you're going to turn your opacity way down to like 30% or something like that, so that it isn't quite so harsh. But honestly, I recommend leaving it at 100% just so you can clearly see where your highlights are and just kind of stroke all that stuff in. You know, if you find that you're pushing too hard, turn your rate down a bit and keep on going. I'm going to click on the erase tool and erase some of that. And then go back to your smudge and just continue to smudge. What I'm doing here is I'm erasing half of it because I only want the highlight to really show on one side. And then I just kind of smudge the detail back together. So just continue to work on that until you get the result that you want, and we'll go on to the next step, which is going to be adding a little bit more detail to the puddle. Alright, so here is the result I ended up with. Now I turned mine down to about 35.7 to kind of get the result I want. It may be a different number for you. It all really depends on how light or dark the color red was that you initially chose. And if you don't like the color red that you used in the first place, you can always just change it by adjusting the color red that you're going to use, clicking OK, and then filling in that highlight layer with the bucket tool, and it will drastically change how everything highlights. So just mess around with that until you get a color that you like. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually tweak the puddle a little bit, and we're gonna add some highlights around the edge to kind of make it look a little better, and we're probably gonna add some detail to the base to make it highlight a little more intricately. And to do that, we're gonna actually put our puddle inside of a layer group, and we're going to group it with a highlight layer. So to do that, I'm going to click on the layer group button here at the bottom, and it's going to create a new group. And then I'm going to click on the puddle layer, and I'm going to drag it and I'm going to drop it into the layer group, and we're going to work from there. Now, my recording software doesn't let me do dragging and dropping in Gimp for some reason, so I have to stop the video, drag it and drop it and put it in, and then resume the video from there. But just know that I'm actually just going to simply take this puddle and drop it into this layer group that we have created. Now, once I dropped my puddle layer into the layer group, something weird happened with my colors. And I'm going to try to explain to you what happened here. Essentially, the layer mode, whenever a layer mode is inside of a group, it's only going to affect the layers in the group. It doesn't affect anything outside of that. So this multiply layer mode that I have set to this layer essentially goes away because it only affects the layers in the layer group. So in order to fix that, we're going to actually set our layer group's layer mode to multiply, and we're going to set our puddle to normal. So essentially now what we have is what happens is the images inside of the group work together to create an internal result, and then after that it spits it out to the layer group, and the result that is created that goes to the layer group is then applied with the layer mode multiply. So right now, since we only have two layers, one layer set to normal and one layer set to multiply, we're essentially getting the same exact result we had without the layer group. Now, why is this important? This is important because we're going to actually right click on this layer and create a new layer, and we're going to create our highlights. So puddle highlights, and we're going to fill this to white and click OK. We're going to actually create our highlights inside of the puddle highlights, or inside of this layer group. We're going to set this layer mode to overlay, and what you'll notice is going to happen is the only part of the image that actually gets lighter is the puddle. If I were to hide this layer group and do the same thing, have a white layer outside of the group, oops, and set it to overlay, you'll notice that it actually affects everything, whereas the one inside of the group does not. It only affects the puddle. So now we're going to right click on this and we're going to add a layer mask. We're going to set it to black full transparency and click add, and all of that highlight goes away. So reset our colors, switch over to the color white, and get our brush tool out and make use of our Wacom tablet and use a semi-soft or a hard brush again, oops, and just kind of paint the color white around these edges where we want to have our highlights. And then from there we will just click on our smudge tool and we will start smudging all this until we get the result that we want. And what's really cool is, like I said earlier, this overlay layer is essentially just going to make parts of our layer red, parts of our red puddle lighter, and then after it makes it lighter, it's going to make it set the layer mode to multiply, so we still keep all those shadows and all that detail that we wanted to keep in the first place. So it's really cool, especially if you follow what I'm saying. It's just a really powerful way to be able to make use of these layer groups, this new function in GIMP 2.8. And actually I have another tutorial on layer groups. It's not really a tutorial, it's actually just an article, but it kind of explains what I'm trying to say with some pictures, and it might help you out a little bit if you don't fully understand what I'm saying. So just continue to kind of massage these details in until you're happy with the result, and then get ready for the next step. And there you have it. That's pretty much everything I've done to create this image. Like I said, it just takes a little bit of time. Really, I'd say this took me probably about an hour and a half to do. Most of the time I spent smudging, going back to different layers and massaging some details as I put it together. In this lesson I kind of showed you a very linear way of going about it, and oftentimes it's not that linear. Usually, you'll have the smudge tool out and you'll start smudging on a row on the color up here, and you'll notice that there's a detail down here that you don't really think looks very good. So you'll stop, you'll switch over to that layer, and you'll start smudging that detail in, And ultimately, I think I ended up recreating the 2-layer brighten duplicates 2 or 3 times at least, just because I kept on tweaking the edge. So just really take your time, smudge some more, and then after that, smudge again. And eventually you'll get the result that you like, and you'll be happy with it. So I hope this tutorial helped. If you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. And I guess that's it. Thanks, guys.